The war that the United States and Israel initiated against Iran is spreading. More and more countries are getting involved, not only in the Middle East, but in other regions of the world. And the US and Israel are attacking more and more countries, while Donald Trump is now even threatening longtime US allies in Europe. What we're seeing right now is a situation of chaos, and it's getting worse and worse as the US government tries to solve every political issue with more bombs and bullets. So as the US and Israel have been bombing Iran, Iran has been retaliating in self-defense, which it is allowed to do under international law, and Iran has been hitting US military bases in many countries surrounding it in the Middle East, in West Asia. Meanwhile, the global price of oil has been skyrocketing because Iran has vowed to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which is the most important oil transit choke point on Earth. Every single day, 1/5, more than 20% of the global oil supply travels through this very narrow strait, and it's right off the coast of Iran, and Tehran has vowed to shut down this strait in response to the US-Israeli war. At the same time, the State Department has ordered US citizens to evacuate all of the countries of the region, including Bahrain, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Israel, occupied Palestine, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Syria, the United Arab Emirates, and Yemen. And yet, at the same time, the US State Department is not actually providing any support for Americans who are trying to flee these countries. It's a situation of extreme chaos. But instead of trying to stabilize the situation, you know what Donald Trump is doing? He's threatening to pour fuel on the fire, and now the US government is making plans to arm Kurdish groups, fighters, not only in Iran, but also in Iraq, to wage a war on the ground instead of sending US troops. CNN reported that the CIA is working to arm Kurdish forces to spark an uprising in Iran. And according to CNN, the US strategy is not only to arm these Kurdish mercenaries in northwestern Iran, but also in northeastern Iraq. So the US wants them to invade Iran from across the Iraqi border. This could spread the war even further because this is very likely going to worry Turkey, a NATO member, which is constantly playing the West against the East, playing both sides. Turkey is deathly afraid of Kurdish armed groups because for decades there have been Kurdish armed groups operating in southeastern Turkey. So as the CIA prepares an invasion of Iran by arming these Kurdish militants, Turkey may also start attacking these Kurdish groups in Iraq, in Iran, in Turkey, maybe even in Syria, because the US was previously backing armed Kurdish groups in Syria to try to overthrow the Syrian government, which the US did succeed in. So the US is now threatening to expand this war further by potentially dragging in Turkey, which has the second largest military in NATO after the US itself. The situation is absolutely crazy. But it has been reported now by multiple Western media outlets that Trump is calling leaders of Kurdish armed groups in Iraq and preparing to invade Iran to open another front in this war against Iran. And all this is deeply ironic because Trump was elected on the promise that he would be a so-called peace president and he would not wage any more wars. But Trump has been openly saying that this war that the US is waging against Iran, an illegal war of aggression, could go on for several weeks or far longer, he said. But in the meantime, this war is getting larger and larger by the day because Israel is also expanding this war. Israel has now invaded Lebanon, and what Israel is now trying to do is reoccupy southern Lebanon. Back in 1982, Israel invaded South Lebanon and occupied the area for nearly 2 decades until 2000, when indigenous resistance groups inside Lebanon expelled the Israeli occupiers. Well, now Israel is taking advantage of this regional war to reoccupy southern Lebanon, opening another front in this growing international war. But that's not all, because Israel is likewise using this war against Iran to open up another war, which is the war on Gaza. Israel has once again started its siege of Gaza, trying to starve the Palestinian people, denying them food and supplies, as Israel prepares to annex Gaza and more Palestinian territory. But what's even crazier is that's not all, because at the same time, the US is attacking several other countries. For instance, Reuters reported that US Marines are now shooting protesters in Pakistan, in the Pakistani city of Karachi. And the US has started another war in Latin America, on the other side of the world. US Southern Command, which oversees US military operations in Latin America, announced that US military forces have launched operations in Ecuador in South America. So while Trump is waging war on Iran, an illegal war of aggression, and as Iran is retaliating and hitting US bases in a dozen countries in the region, and while Israel is imposing another siege of Gaza and invading Lebanon, the US decided, hey, this is a great time to start a war in Ecuador as well. And keep in mind that this is at a time when the US is also basically waging a war on Cuba. The New York Times admitted that the US military is carrying out a naval blockade of Cuba to strangle the country, denying Cuba oil, preventing it from importing any oil, to starve the country of the supplies it needs to try to collapse the economy to overthrow Cuba's revolutionary government. That is still happening during this war. As the US is waging war on Iran, the US military is also making sure that no oil can be sent to Cuba. In fact, Bloomberg reported that Russia tried to send a tanker of oil to Cuba, but the US forced the Russian tanker to turn away, to try to suffocate and collapse Cuban society. So again, to clarify all this madness that's happening right now, the US and Israel launched an illegal war of aggression against Iran, which continues to escalate. Iran has hit multiple countries in the region, targeting US military bases, which are in basically every other country in the region. Israel has invaded Lebanon and is blockading Gaza yet again. The CIA is working with Kurdish groups in Iraq to invade Iran from Iraq, which could potentially draw Turkey into an even bigger regional war. And the US military is shooting protesters in Pakistan, and the US military started another war in Ecuador. And in January, Trump invaded Venezuela and kidnapped Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro. And Trump is now trying to suffocate Cuba with a naval blockade of Cuba. And this is all being done by a guy who calls himself the peace president. Again, Trump campaigned promising that he would end US wars and he would be a peacemaker. Just a few weeks ago, Trump launched an organization that he calls the Board of Peace, which in reality was an attempt by the US to replace the United Nations with a privatized pro-war organization that only the US can control. But all this is totally crazy and Orwellian. Trump now has the world record for bombing more countries than any other US president. And I'm not trying to absolve other US presidents. All presidents in the modern history of the US have been war criminals who have carried out illegal wars of aggression abroad. If you look at the past 4 presidents in the past 25 years, since 2001, that's George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Trump, and Joe Biden. Together, these presidents have waged war on 10 countries. Trump is the only one who has attacked all 10 countries when you combine his first and second terms. In 2025 alone, the first year of his presidency, Trump bombed 7 countries, and now we can also add Ecuador. So Trump has attacked 11 countries in his 2 terms as president, including Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Pakistan, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Venezuela, Nigeria, Iran, and now Ecuador. And he has 3 more years So who knows how many more countries he's going to attack in the next few years. And by the way, while all this is happening, Trump is also threatening to attack longtime U.S. allies, including Spain, a member of the European Union, because Spain has really been a thorn in the side of the U.S. empire in the past few years. Spain currently has a left-wing government led by the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party, and the left-wing government of Spain has been the only country in the EU that has been openly opposing Trump's illegal war of aggression against Iran. Trump has been demanding that countries in Europe let the US military use their bases in order to attack Iran. And the UK is allowing the US to use its military bases. However, Spain is not. The Spanish government has told the US that it cannot use Spanish military bases in order to launch strikes on Iran. And the Spanish government has condemned this war, saying that it's illegal and violates international law, which is objectively true, by the way. So you know what Trump's response has been? He's now threatening to attack Spain. In the White House, when Trump was holding a press briefing with the leader of Germany sitting right next to him, another member of the EU, Trump said that he ordered the Treasury Secretary, the billionaire hedge fund manager from Wall Street, Scott Bessent, to cut off all trade with Spain, to impose an embargo on Spain. And one of Trump's big complaints there is that the left-wing government of Spain opposes the extreme militarism of the US and most of the European countries, which have announced they're going to more than double their military spending from 2% of GDP to 5% of GDP. And the Spanish government said, no, we should be spending more on social programs and healthcare and education and civilian infrastructure, not weapons and military infrastructure. But this is infuriating the US government and the US military industrial complex, which of course, all these US corporations want to profit from selling more weapons and military equipment to European members of NATO. But I actually think it's about even more than just that. I think Trump is also trying to punish Spain because Spain has been one of the very few European countries that not only opposes the illegal US war of aggression against Iran, but also has openly supported Palestine. And in October 2025, the left-wing parties in the Spanish parliament formally approved an arms embargo against Israel. The right-wing pro-US parties voted against this law because they support Israel, but the left-wing parties approved this measure to ban the shipment of any weapons to Israel in solidarity with Palestine. And Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez also criticized Israel for, quote, exterminating a defenseless people, end quote, by bombing hospitals in Gaza and, quote, killing innocent boys and girls with hunger, end quote. And by the way, while all this is happening, Spain has also been pushing for closer ties with China, which has really infuriated Washington because the political forces inside Europe are split. Most leaders in Europe are very Atlanticist, very pro-US, but Spain, the left-wing government in Spain, has been a bit more independent and has been trying to diversify its foreign relations and improve relations with China. So all of this explains why the Trump administration is so furious with the Spanish government and why Trump is now threatening to attack Spain and impose a trade embargo against Spain after Madrid refused to allow the US military to use its bases to attack Iran. However, with all of that said, I mentioned that Europe is internally very much divided politically, and among the major European countries, one of the most pro-US governments is the right-wing government of Germany, led by the multi-millionaire Friedrich Merz, who obediently does whatever Trump wants. And I mentioned that Trump made these comments threatening Spain while he was sitting in the White House in a press briefing right next to the leader of Germany, Chancellor Merz. And don't forget who exactly Friedrich Merz is. The reason he's such a diehard Atlanticist, he's so pro-US, is because he is a multimillionaire from Wall Street. He was previously the head of the German arm of BlackRock, the extremely powerful Wall Street investment firm, the largest asset manager on earth. And given his work with Wall Street financial firms, Meretz has become very wealthy. He's a multimillionaire who owns 2 private jets. I repeat, 2 private jets. So it's no wonder that he supports whatever the US government wants, because his class interests lie with Wall Street, not the people of Germany, not the people of Europe. He is a capitalist oligarch who is only following his economic interests, which happen to go against the interests of his country.